Tonight we're honored to have with us a man who will speak on a subject that's had lots of press lately, and one that affects all of us, and going to affect us even more so in the future. The talk's also somewhat timely since I understand this is National Cyber Security Month. I didn't know that until tonight. I'm not going to give you a long, formal introduction since you have in your program his accolades and his history and his resume. So without formal ado, I'll give you Craig, whose credentials, like I say, speak for themselves. Craig Schaffer, CEO and founder of First72 Cyber, LLC.
Of course, I will have to bend that over because I'm not tall. All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here this afternoon. It's really a pleasure to talk to you about the subject. This has been a hot topic for the entire time I've been in it, which has been almost 20 years. And that fact alone should tell you that this is not a problem that's going away. This is actually a problem that has evolved and continues to evolve and will continue to evolve for certainly my lifetime and probably that of my kids and their kids. It's a space that continues to be fascinating. I started out as a lawyer doing mergers and acquisitions for a Wall Street law firm. I can tell you that this is harder, more intellectually challenging, and more dynamic than anything I saw practicing law at the beginning of my career. So we're going to talk about a variety of things, but ultimately I wanted to just throw the mantra of our company up first, which is, you know, in the first 72 hours of a cyber incident, you're going to learn a lot about the last 72 months of your cybersecurity efforts. And that's true for companies, it's also true for individuals. If you're doing what you need to be doing from a cybersecurity perspective, then the incidents that occur, and there will always be incidents, will have decent outcomes. And if you're not, the world will learn about the fact that you weren't doing the things that you needed to do. And so getting those things done in advance, being prepared like any other emergency, cybersecurity rewards those who are prepared. So we're going to talk about a variety of things. We'll run through just a brief intro of me and what First72 Cyber is. Then we're going to talk about what the cybersecurity threat is in general to society writ large. We'll talk about account takeovers and what those really are and how they work. We'll talk a little bit about this issue of the fact that the bad guys tend to focus on the weakest link, and that means you want to avoid being the weakest link. Then we'll talk a bit about some things that you can do, that everyone can do, to reduce their risk and put themselves in a position to have a decent outcome, even if something does happen. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you've got a higher risk situation, there's more that you should be doing, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And hopefully we'll do all of that in about 30 minutes. So I'm going to talk fast and give you an opportunity to ask me questions as you like when we get done. So you do have my bio in your materials. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. I'm a lawyer by training. I started out doing M&A work. I got into cybersecurity law, found it completely fascinating. Ended up going to the Justice Department as a federal prosecutor on computer crime cases in the 90s. Got to see a lot of the beginnings of this when there really wasn't as much going on, but we predicted where it was likely to go. Became a consultant with PricewaterhouseCoopers, doing cybersecurity investigations and forensic work at a lot of large companies around the world. And then went on to be a Chief Information Security Officer for Alltel. That's how I ended up here in Arkansas. My wife was born in Little Rock, so we're here in Hot Springs and have been on and off since 2003. When Alltel was sold to Verizon, I went back and became the Assistant Secretary for Cybersecurity and Communications at the Department of Homeland Security. Was responsible for all of the .gov security for a period of about 3 years before coming back to Arkansas to be the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer for Fidelity Information Services, and then left Fidelity to start up First72 Cyber. First72 Cyber is really a company that is out there trying to do assessment work, helping people understand cybersecurity risk. So we have a compliance tool for banks to tell them whether or not they're in compliance with the regulations around cybersecurity. We have a solution that allows them to assess themselves from a standards compliance perspective, and then we have a tool that allows them to look at how their vendors are doing from a cybersecurity perspective, because as we saw in the Target situation, your HVAC vendor, your air conditioning folks can get you in trouble just as much as your own network. And so we've got a solution for that as well, and we do a bunch of other things in terms of consulting and exercises and various other work for mostly financial institutions. So, with all of that background and having seen this from a million angles over the course of the last several years, we're now at a point where, why are we talking about cybersecurity? What is it about cybersecurity that has made us focus on it so much over the last several years? And the answer is, this is an area that has evolved tremendously. It's an area where we have put an enormous amount of effort as a society. In other words, everything that we do today is digitized. There is very little that you can do from a business perspective that is not focused on cyber in one way or another. And back in the 90s, when I was with the Justice Department, I worked with a gentleman named Scott Charney, who's now the head of trustworthy computing for Microsoft. And Scott Charney was asked by Janet Marino at the time, why is this cybersecurity problem continuing to get worse? Why does it keep growing over time? It doesn't seem to level off. It's a never-ending curve going up. And he said, well, I have a theory. My theory is, at any given point in time, a certain percentage of the population is up to no good. That's the whole theory. What did he mean? What he meant was that there are bad guys, there are bad gals, there are bad people in the world, and when they learn how to use the technology, they're going to use it to do their job, just like the rest of us are going to use it to do our jobs. And what he recognized in that early stage was that more and more people were becoming cyber literate, and the more people who understood the technology, well, a certain percentage of them were bad people, and they were going to use that technology for what they did. And that was going to become increasingly a problem over the years. And that is indeed exactly how this has played out. We thought this would get bad. We didn't realize how bad it would get. And that's because we didn't realize how things would change. And they changed very, very rapidly. In fact, what we've seen is that back in the 90s, when I started out as a federal prosecutor, hacking, cybersecurity, the things that we were having to deal with were very different. What we saw back then was that the internet was, primarily used for dissemination of information. We didn't have all this transaction stuff. We didn't have billions of dollars changing hands over the internet back then. We mostly were pushing out information about what we did, what our businesses were about. We were advertising to a certain extent. There were some transactions, but not nearly what we saw today. Moreover, there were certain kinds of businesses that were online, but not everybody was online. And not every kind of technology had been digitized. And as a practical matter, the hackers were explorers. These were people who were interested in seeing what they could get to, what they could touch, could they get into some system or solution. Particularly the government entities were very attractive to a lot of these folks. And when they did get in, they were what I refer to as loud and proud. They wanted you to know they had gotten in, they wanted to make noise about it, they wanted to brag. It was all about street credibility and proving that they could do something that theoretically they weren't supposed to be able to do. And when they did that, they would publish what they had done, they would explain it to other people. It really was a very different community. And so what we saw back then was stuff like this, where someone would hack in to the CIA's webpage and post this instead of what the CIA really wanted to have out there. Now, this was annoying as all get out to the CIA. They were very displeased when this sort of thing happened, as was the Justice Department and every other part of the federal government that got hacked, as well as lots of large companies whose pages were defaced. But it wasn't exactly the danger, treacherous situation that we're dealing with today. Today, things are very, very different. Today, at the end of the day, we're dealing with something much more insidious. because the hacks that we're seeing now are not designed to get your attention. If your computer is possessed by the bad guys, if they have gotten a virus or a worm or some piece of malware on your machine, their goal is that you have no idea that it is there. They don't even want to slow down your processor. They want to sit stealthily and gather the information that they need in order to steal something of value. And because of that, they're very non-obvious. They're very much under the radar, trying to fly low, slow, and quietly through the world that is cyberspace. And as they do that, they create a lot of risk for the rest of us. They're very focused on things of value. And when I say that, I don't just mean money, but they are very interested in money. I went to Fidelity Information Services after they had a breach where $13 million were taken out of ATMs all over the world in a very short period of time. That kind of breach, called an unlimited cash out operation by the Secret Service, is something that has happened to a lot of companies over the years. And it happened for reasons that are just very clear. That's where the money is. And as a practical matter, that's where the criminal activity is going to focus. And so what you see today is that there's enormous amounts of organized crime. They're very professional. They're very focused on getting access to money, to identities, to intellectual property, to information about transactions that they can use to just make publicly traded trades on the stock market perhaps or otherwise. But getting access to information that's valuable is what seems to be the focus of most of the criminal activity and hacker activity out there in the world. And they're not trying to get your attention so much, for the most part, as we saw back in the 90s. Now, there are some organizations that are called hacktivists. There are people who are trying to be activists, but they're doing it online. And those folks sometimes are trying to be noisy about what they do. Slightly different frame, but at the end of the day, it is a situation where a lot of this happens in ways that you wouldn't necessarily become aware of. The fact is, today, because of the enormous size of the ecosystem that we have, because we have so much code that has been written, because we have so many parts of the ecosystem that is in fact done online, that generally offense wins and defense loses. If someone is a determined hacker and they are after you, chances are they're going to get into your system. And most people who are defenders, most people who are in law enforcement or the military or otherwise, have reached the conclusion that we can't stop people at the gates anymore. We're not preventing them as a strategy. We are doing as much as we can to prevent, but then we are also trying to detect, to respond, to recover, rather than simply expect that we can keep everyone out, because we simply can't. The code base is too large, the amount of surface area for the attackers to go after is too great, and at the end of the day, this is not a problem that you can solve with engineering like you can solve the problem of, say, a hurricane. People want it to be that. They want it to be, well, we know what a hurricane looks like, and if we build the building in the right way, we're never going to have this problem again, we're going to be done. And I can't tell you how many boards and senior managers at major companies around the world have said, well, when are we going to solve this thing? When is it going to be over? It's going to be over when crime stops. Predictions. Anybody got an idea of when that's going to happen? When crime stops, this will stop. The fact is, this is not like a hurricane. The analogy that I found is most effective at making people understand what this is really like is that this is like ants trying to get into your house. You have food in your house? The ants are trying to get in your house. And you can caulk, and you can spray, and you can clean, and you can do everything that you think you ought to be doing to keep the ants out of your house. But on some given Tuesday, you're going to be in the pantry, and there's an ant. And if you're fast at putting your thumb down, and then you move everything out of the way, and you find the hole in the caulk that formed because you moved this shelf from here to there, you can caulk that up, and maybe you can stop the ants from getting in that hole. But you better be vigilant, because they'll get in again, and again, and again. because the ants are never going to stop trying to get into your house. Why? You've got food in there. You have money on the internet? The bad guys are coming. And they're not going to stop. And they're not a hurricane. Hurricanes do not change their strategy when you build a building to a certain spec. But the bad guys do. They change their strategy every time we make a move, and they always will. And so this problem is not going away. It's going to become more complicated. This is just a view of a number of attacks that have happened in the last 2.5 years. Household names, lots of organizations that you would have heard of, and this stuff just keeps coming. Moreover, the trend line here's, the trend lines are not very good. Not for anybody who's on the good guy side of things. The fact is, the sophistication of the bad guys is growing tremendously. They're organized, they're very effective at what they do, they specialize, and they talk to each other. The good guys have a hard time getting along sometimes, right? I mean, we have turf wars on the good guy side. The bad guys are motivated by this thing called profit motive. And they're looking to get an ROI on the activity that they engage in. They want a return on their investment of time and energy. And as a consequence, they have figured out that one guy ought to specialize in getting into the system. And then another guy can specialize on finding the good stuff inside. And someone else can specialize on decrypting the information once they've got a hold of it. And someone else can sell the stuff for us when he gets it out of the system. And then someone else can figure out how to monetize it once it's in the hands of the right person to take it to market. There are eBay-like sales places on the dark web, a place you can't get to with your browser, but that the bad guys can readily access, where you can buy lots of 10,000 stolen identities, and the price is set by the demographic information telling how much money the people in a certain zip code make. And so you can buy a lot of stolen identities from a certain zip code on some of these forums. This is version-controlled software. These people are hacking 9 to 5 in the time zone that they are in. They may be getting benefits, I don't know. But these folks this is their job. This is not something they're doing on the side. This is what they're doing to make a living. And as a practical matter, the defenders have to be good everywhere. These folks can be opportunistic. They simply need to find a hole in the system that they're looking at. They don't care which hole it is. They don't care if it's the HVAC vendor. They don't care if it's some other third party. If they can find a way into the system they're trying to get into, they're good. And as a practical matter, what that means is the defenders have to be good all of the time, everywhere, in order to be effective. Because the ants will crawl over that house 24/7, 365, until they find a hole. And the nice thing about these ants is, just like the ants in the real world, they tell their friends when they get in. And they say, oh, we found a hole over here, folks. Come and get it. Why do they do that? Because that covers their tracks. If they've gotten in and stolen something, they want everybody to come in and steal something, because at the end of the day, it reduces the risk of them getting caught for the crime that they've just committed. And so it's a very cooperative environment out there on the bad guy side of things. At the end of the day, this is, make no mistake, big business. This is organized big business. This was an article in Wired magazine just recently about whether or not cybercrime was the next entrepreneurial growth business for the world. They cite in this article that McAfee, one of the antivirus companies, believes that there's about $400 billion of impact to the global economy from hacking today. $400 billion on an annual basis. So if you think about it this way, this is like a big hidden tax on all of us, right? Because an appreciable part of what you pay for a car or a computer or any piece of clothing you've got on, every one of these companies is spending enormous amounts of money to defend their networks. And they have to, because if they don't, their intellectual property will go out the door, their coin may go out the door, anything they have that is stored digitally, which is usually everything they have, is potentially at risk if they don't take the steps. And even if they do, there are still instances when you have the activity that we see here. Well, I've made it awfully gloomy now. Let's talk a little bit about the things that may impact individuals, and in particular the group that we have before us tonight. There is a certain kind of hack called an account takeover, which has become very, very prevalent over the last several years. And what this really is the bad guys figuring out, and the bankers in the room are going to like it when I say this out loud, that the banks have done a pretty good job of getting serious about this problem. And they have started to lock down their systems in a much more effective way than a lot of other industries. They put a lot of effort into this because they recognize that if there's a lot of money on the internet, the banks is a place where they've got a lot of aggregation of that, and they need to take steps, and they have. So the bad guys have said, well, okay, can't go directly after the bank, how about the bank's customers? And if I focus on the customers, maybe I can still get into the bank. So what they do, and what you see represented here, is that they go and find victim computers. They find people who have accounts at banks. Anybody have a bank account? Anybody access their bank account online? Okay. They're looking for people who have bank accounts. And if they can get a piece of malware on your computer in any number of ways, and we'll talk about some of the ways that they use, they are looking to get your login information for your bank. They want your username and they want your password. If that's what you use to get into your bank, a username and password, if they can get that, then you know what they can do? They can log into your account, and the bank legitimately and reasonably believes that they are you, right? And once that happens, anything you can do, they can do better. So they install malware on your home computer, your home machine, and then that malware just sits there, quietly, stealthily, not trying to make any trouble whatsoever, waiting for you to do one thing. Log into your brokerage account, log into your bank account, log into something where you've got the ability to transact business, and they gather your password and your username. And then when they have that, they send it back to themselves, and then they log into your account, and they try to send a wire to themselves, usually in some country that is not the one you are sitting in. Now, that is a bad outcome for you, because from the bank's perspective, that is you coming into the bank. Now, the good news is most of the financial institutions, if you're dealing with an individual, have taken the position that, hey, we're going to make our clients whole. We're not going to put this onus on them. It's a hassle for you, but for the most part, the banks have been in that mode. However, if you are the owner of a small business, and this is a business account versus an individual account, there have been different outcomes to some of these attacks. And so it's important to take every step you can to avoid this from happening, whether your bank will back you up or not, because A, you don't want the hassle, and B, you could have a loss. And so it's important to pay attention and do as much as you can to prevent this from happening to you and your accounts. So the attackers, they are definitely going to focus on the weakest link. And it's not always going to come in the notion of a piece of software that loads onto your machine without you realizing it, a virus or worm that spreads by itself. They will use any method that they can to get in. And so the recent way that they've done this, because they realize that a lot of people have installed antivirus and have done some of the things that they should be doing about patching that we'll talk about later, they've come up with some other ideas, which is, well, if I can get into your email account, then perhaps I can send an email to your bank, and the bank will think it's you. Or better yet, if it's a small business, and I can get into the CEO's account, and I can have the CEO send an email to the CFO and tell him, boy, I need you to send this $250,000 wire tonight, Friday night usually, because we've got this deal and it's not going to close unless we get the money to them before Hong Kong time. If the CFO doesn't call the CEO and say, did you really send me this thing? You never did that before. You want me to send this $250,000 tonight on Friday? I'm trying to go home. If he doesn't do that, or she doesn't do that, that $250,000 is going out the door. Because the CFO has all the right codes, has all the right access, has the authority, and is going to tell the bank to send the wire. Now, you may think that this is hypothetical. You may think that this is something that people are worried about but isn't really happening. I'm sorry, but that is not true. Indeed, 2 weeks ago, I got a call on a Friday night from a bank that I've been doing some work with, and they said exactly this. $236,000 was out the door. We were able to stop it because we got on it fast. We got the law enforcement authorities engaged late on Friday night. We picked up the phone, we woke some people up, we did what we needed to do. But you can't always do that, and the fact is, a lot of organizations don't make those calls until after too much time has passed and the money is already gone. These folks are sophisticated, they're smart, they understand how the systems work, and they're taking full advantage of it. But again, there are some things that you can do to make sure that this is not what's happening to you or your small business and your accounts. And so that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of the talk. First of all, you don't want to be low-hanging fruit. You don't want to be the easy mark, you don't want to be the easy target. Most of these folks get in through very easy means. They get in because people do things that are just, you know, it's what I call too stupid to be true. Really? We'll show you some examples of that in a moment. If you're doing the right things, very basic things, the fact is you're going to be better than the guy next to you because so many people are not doing these things. So many people are not doing these things that you can make yourself harder to get at than the guy next door. And if you are, the chances are the bad guys will move on because it's just not worth their trouble. They don't want to take extra time on you. And the fact is, at the end of the day, you don't have to outrun the bear. You don't. You just have to outrun the other ones running away from the bear. If you are harder to get at, they will turn away. Because they need to make an ROI too. They have a supervisor who is looking over their shoulder saying, how much did you hack today? And they need to produce. And if they're not producing, if they're not able to get into your account, some folks will be stubborn and they'll stick with it for a while. But the fact is, they don't want to spend a lot of time and aggravation worrying about you. They just want to get into the fish in a barrel, the easy pickings. They want that low-hanging fruit. And if you're not that, the chances are you're going to avoid a lot of aggravation in the space. So, first and foremost, the most important thing I am going to say to you tonight, and I'm not going to give up on this. I have been saying this in speeches for 20 years, and no one is listening. But I'm going to continue to say it. I'm going to beg you. I'm going to plead with you. If you think that password is a good password because you used $signs instead of the S's, no! Don't do it. When I show you the next slide, I'm going to prove to you how this is still a problem. But people continue to use horrible passwords. Look, it's not that hard. This crazy looking password in the middle here, this thing that says IMUM1RGPW2D exclamation point, that's going to take years for them to decrypt. They're not going to be able to figure out what that is. But all it is, right? All it is I made up my first really good password today, exclamation point. That's it! It's the first letter in that phrase. You can remember it. You don't even have to write it down. But if you do write it down, don't feel bad. Don't. Because I want you to do the following calculation in your head. Really. Do calculation. If you write it down, who has access to it? 7 people? Put it in your wallet. Now who has access to it? 2 people? If you use a bad password, there's 1 billion people in the world that can get to you online. If you write down a good password and put it in your wallet, take that chance. Write it down. It's okay. We're not thinking, security people have this black and white way of looking at the world. There's a lot of security people out there who don't realize that security is an exercise in risk management, right? Well, the risk of you writing it down versus the risk of you using a lousy password, it's a bad bet. Don't make a bad bet, okay? Now, just to prove to you that after 20 years, it used to be, it has gotten a little bit better, because it used to be that password was the most often used password. That was the top of the list every year. But how many people have heard about this Ashley Madison? Everybody's heard of that. Okay, I got it. So, you would think a site where people are getting on because they're going to cheat on their spouse, they would use a good password. Right? The best password they could think of. For that thing, they would use a good password, right? Here's the top 8 passwords that were used on Ashley Madison. You ready? Now, because this is a family audience, I'm only showing you the top 8. Below the line, it gets a little funky, but it's no better from a security perspective. This is what people use. 120,000 people thought that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 was secure for my cheating activity. You can't make this stuff up. Use a good password, because here's the thing, right? If you use a decent password, there's 120,000 people that are easier to hack than you. Just on this list. So, it's not that hard to be more secure than most of the world, apparently. There's other simple things that you can do as well. All joking aside, security people will tell you, install and use antivirus software. It matters. If somebody told you because you have a Mac you don't need it, don't listen to them. You need it. Whatever computer you're using, whatever device you're using, if there's antivirus software available for it, install it and use it and keep it up to date. If you install it now and 2 years from now you've never updated the virus definitions, it's not working real well for you, okay? Install patches. Make sure that when the security patches are released from Microsoft or Apple or whoever else's software you have, they come out, go ahead and install them. If you don't know how to do it yourself, some grandkid does. I guarantee you. Let them do it. My son has gotten real good at it. Turn on the firewall on your machine, turn it on. It knows what to do, just turn it on. The operating systems have become good at managing this themselves. If you get an email from someone you don't know, don't open it. But when you do, because you will, don't click on the links, right? We all make the mistake. I've done it, right? You're going through your email fast, you open something, you're like, oh, what is that? Just don't click on the links once you've opened it up. Even if the story sounds really juicy. If you've got a wireless network, your router has the ability to put a password on it. That was not something that the manufacturer thought was, going to be fun. It's there for a reason. Put a password in there. And not password, and not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and not the address of your house, and not the name of your kid. Put a password in there with a phrase, and you can remember it. If you just use the first letters of a phrase, you'll be able to remember it, and that's the way to do it. Make sure that it is something good. Now, if you are a high net worth individual, if you are someone who moves significant amounts of money around, if you are someone who's engaged in international business, if you are someone who has a higher risk profile than the average person who's putting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as their password, you need to do more. And more doesn't have to look crazy. It doesn't have to mean onerous, uncomfortable, painful things. It just means that you're doing some things that make sense. Don't go in and use the computer in the public library to transact any of your banking business. Don't go check your stock portfolio. Don't do anything like that where you're going to give up your username and your password on a machine that you don't own or control. If you're going to log onto your account, your cell phone signal is a better answer than a public Wi-Fi signal. Because let me tell you what can happen. When you walk into Starbucks and you say, well, Starbucks, I trust Starbucks. And I can see their signal. I'm going to log onto the Starbucks network. There are 6 guys. They have hoodies on. They're sitting and they're trying not to make eye contact with you. And in their bag they have, guess what? It's a MiFi. And guess what they named their MiFi hotspot?
Oh.
Starbucks!
Oh.
You're not attaching to the Starbucks network in that moment. You're attaching to the guy who's sitting closest to you. Because there's competing nefarious Starbucks. There can be. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Starbucks, Wi-Fi, or McDonald's, or any of the other folks who provide free Wi-Fi. What I'm saying is, you don't need to do your banking there because there could be some kid sitting there trying to take advantage. And that has happened to real people, and you don't want it to be you. And there's no need for you to do that. If you've got a cell phone, you probably have the ability to get your computer online with that cell phone. That's a better way, or just wait till you get home in a controlled environment that you know to do the banking business. If you are really serious about this, the FBI's recommendation is you use a separate machine for your transacting banking business than everything else. You don't surf on it. You don't do anything else on that machine. You do your banking business and that's it, and then you close it and you shut it down and you put it away. You can buy a Chromebook for about $199, and you can make that a dedicated machine for your banking. And you never have to do anything else with it, and you never have to worry about it becoming infected because you don't surf on it, you don't open emails on it, and you don't do any of those things, and you can't make a mistake. That's what the FBI recommends that you do. It's not a bad idea. There are some other things that you can ask for from your financial institution. I'm not going to make eye contact over here because there's a couple of bankers in the room, but some of the banks have second-factor authentication. They'll give you a little fob that will allow you to have a password that changes every couple of seconds, and you use that. It's a higher degree of assurance. Some of them have out of wallet, out of band. They'll send you a text message when you're logging in. There's a variety of things that are available there. Take advantage of those if you're transacting that kind of business online. Find out what's available and use the strongest capability that your institution has. And if you've never sent a foreign wire to, say, Romania, you could tell the bank, no wires overseas out of my account. You could even say, no wires at all, unless I'm standing in front of you in the bank branch. I don't want faxed in wires, or I'm disavowing myself of the ability to do that. I don't want to do it ever for myself, and I don't want any of the bad guys to do it for me. So find out what your bank will allow you to do. You can ask, and some of them will just note your account so that that doesn't happen, and they're going to reach out to you personally if something like that is coming through. Go look and read what your bank has said about cybersecurity. And I know, as I put this next slide up on the screen, I know it's a mistake. I am not endorsing any of these banks. I am not telling you that they're better or less good, but I went today and I just looked to see local banks and do they have stuff out there. And I found that a lot of them do. And so there is lots of information being published by local banks about what you can do to keep your online account safe and secure. There's probably a lot of other banks that have this posted as well. I just looked to see what I could find very fast for the presentation this evening. So I would urge you to go look and see what it is that's out there, because it can definitely help you to set the right things in motion and take the right actions with respect to your account. Ultimately, success in a cyber incident is going to depend as much on how you prepare as how you respond. And taking these steps, just doing some things, some good hygiene things in advance, can have a big impact on preventing these things from happening and putting you in a better position if something does happen, to be able to say, hey, I did everything that I could to keep myself secure. So with that, I know that by reputation, you are very shy and don't like to ask any questions of your speakers. So I wanted to leave some time. I left a little less time than I had intended, but I do want to leave some time for you to ask me questions.
Password vaults like Dashlane, are those useful? Are they good to use? What would you say about password vaults?
So I think it's all about the reputation and confidence level you have with the publisher of the vault. There's a lot of people out there using the fingerprint scanner on the iPhone or on the Android phones, various other things that are available today. More coming along those lines. There's lots of vaults out there that are published. I would just caution everybody to pay attention to who the publisher is. I don't know about the one in particular that you asked about, but you may have read, for example, about the recent publication of the fact that a lot of the flashlight apps have viruses in them. There are, the bad guys, they're very clever. Everybody wants a flashlight app. They figured out that they could infect that. A lot of people would download it and put it out there. You particularly do not want to use a vault that is a bad guy's vault. That would be bad. But at the end of the day, the notion of aggregating those things, making sure that they're all encrypted, that you have access to them when you need them, but you're not putting yourself in a position. A lot of the operating systems also have that capability, so your browser can cache passwords. Those are encrypted and maintained in a reasonable way by most of the major operating systems and browsers, so there are some things you can do to make it easier to remember the passwords.
Okay, thank you.
Are you talking about iCloud keychain as being?
That iCloud keychain would be another example. There's various things out there that are designed to
As safe?
make that easier. I am not going to endorse.
Well, I'm not
but,
asking you to say that, but.
Sure, but what I'm saying is those large companies that have a huge stake in whether or not that is successful. If there's a problem, it's going to be a huge problem for them. I think that's a helpful way to think about whether or not they're going to be reliable and what that's
Maybe
going
my
to be.
wallet is better.
Again, do the risk calculus. I will tell you that I use some of that functionality on my phone, and I use some of that functionality in my browser. So I trust some of that functionality.
How effective are password cracking software programs? Is that TV stuff or is it for real?
The list of the top 8 that I showed you, all of the passwords that were published in that were encrypted. It took about, I don't know how many milliseconds they said, I don't remember from the article, but those passwords were all cracked before you could get up out of this room and use the restroom and come back. A good password, like the one I suggested you use, would have taken a long time to break. And the fact is, if you're using an English word, they use what's called a dictionary attack. So all of these passwords are what they call hashed. So you give a real password, the computer encrypts that password using an algorithm, and then it stores the encrypted version. It doesn't store the actual text that you put in. And then when you type in your password, it gets hashed with the same algorithm, and if it matches what they've stored, they know that you gave the right password and they'll let you in. Well, the first thing that a bad guy does is they run a dictionary attack. They encrypt every word in the English dictionary, and then the Spanish dictionary, and then the Portuguese dictionary, you name it, through the same algorithm. And if they get a match on what you have stored, then they know that you just used a word. And they can crack those instantaneously. It's very simple. And there's a variety of other techniques that are being used, but the bottom line is it is not made up, it is very real. They can crack a huge percentage of the passwords. If you're using just a plain English word, if you're using someone's name, if you're using a birth date, if you only have numbers, you really need to have uppercase, lowercase, special characters. All of that makes it harder and makes it take longer to crack, and never, ever, ever use a real word. If you're using a real word, they've got you fast.
There's numerous antivirus softwares out there. Is there one that you particularly like?
Yeah, and I'm gonna, especially since we're gonna be posting this on the internet. McAfee, Symantec, you guys, I love all of you guys. I'm not gonna go there, but what I would say is, look, you know, there are a lot of reputable firms. A lot of the operating systems will recommend and point you in the direction of free samples from various ones. There is a lot of competition in that space, and most of those tools are very close to each other in their capabilities. When you start getting, you know, really off-brand, you've never heard of them, none of your friends have heard of them, you think it's novel and interesting, look at where it was published, look at some other data facts. If it's published from a place where most of the hacking is coming from. Common sense.
When you do internet banking, this green screen comes up and it says you're in a protected browser.
So the browsers have the ability to check certain things and give you an indication of whether or not you are at a URL, a universal resource locator, that they recognize, and some of them are signed with digital certificates, and so those indicators are generally good ways to know that you're dealing with the right entity. It used to be you just had the little lock that would show up when you were on an HTTPS site, which is a secure site. Now they turn green. If it turns red, but if it's green, that should be a good indicator. I haven't seen a lot suggesting that that's being manipulated. I'm going to work my way this way and then work my way back.
If you have a really smart password, should you still change it periodically, like once every year or whatever? I mean,
So, two things. I had it on the slide, I didn't say it. First, if you have a really good password and you use it in 700 places, and one of those places gets had, you have a really bad password all of a sudden. Right? So, as painful as this is, you really don't want to use the same password in every place that you go. Now, again, if you're like me and you have, you know, dozens of online accounts, you're out there doing stuff all the time. You know, you can do variations on a theme, right? You can have a password and then you iterate it with an algorithm. And an algorithm just means a pattern, right? You've got a pattern in your head. So you increment the numbers, you know, move through the alphabet, you change something, but you can remember it pretty easily, and then you just have to remember what the first digit or the last digit or something was in order. So they're not all identical, and if they get one, they're not getting into everything that you've got. Should you change it periodically? You know, within corporate America, the standard is about 90 days. You want to change your password about it now. Private people, different risk profile. No one changes it every 90 days. No one does it. But you do want to change it periodically. And so if you change it on your birthday, you know, so you remember to do it, you know, what you have to remember is, if you got compromised, again, there's no bells and whistles, there's no fireworks going off, you're not gonna know you got had, and so the longer you go, the greater the chances are that you could be compromised in multiple places. So if you change it periodically, that's a good thing. Absolutely.
I think this applies to all of us. We're all fathers, daughters, or fathers and mothers. Our daughter has 472 contacts on email. No, on Facebook. I have encouraged her to put limits on those because I can see all of her contacts. How does that impact on us?
So social media, I think, so I have a 16-year-old son,
Yeah.
and I have a 13-year-old daughter. I think I have a 13-year-old daughter. I haven't seen her face in a while. So I know of what you speak. Look, the bottom line is, kids do not have the same mentality about privacy that we do. They don't have, they view things very differently. They're not concerned at all about a lot of this. There's the rare exception, but as a group, I think, teenagers today, they live on social media. That's everything to them. The YouTubers, I mean, I didn't know what a YouTuber was until recently when my daughter explained to me that TV stars and people who have albums are uninteresting and passé. If you have videos on YouTube, that's the cool thing. But the bottom line is, the more information that's out there and the more publicly available it is, right? I mean, the fact is, 400 friends, they legitimately can have 400 friends that they interact with on a regular basis, and those people are not the ones to worry about. But if they have their account set so that everybody on the planet can see everything that they do, well, then there's a bunch of people who what's the golden rule? A certain percentage of the population is up to no good all the time. You don't necessarily want those people in the pool, and you hope that they have some good judgment around the 400, but they don't need to share that with everybody else on the planet Earth. And so I would urge that people do have those settings locked down so that only their friends are seeing their posts, only the people that they know are engaged. Not everybody's going to do that, but I think it will, again, limit the risk to a set of people that at least they putatively know who they are.
If you have set your privacy settings, because I think this affects everybody, are you still going to be hacked?
The reality of today's world is you can be hacked if you do everything 100% perfect all the time. And let me be really clear about that. We probably write and publish more code today than there has ever been newspaper stories written in a day. Right? We have millions of people that their job is to write code. They're writing code every day. You ever read a newspaper that didn't have a typo? Okay? Every typo is potentially a security risk. I mean, what is a bug in a code? It's a typo. It's a mistake. It's something that somebody's done incorrectly in drafting the code. And so, if you think about it in context, the volume of opportunity for somebody to find a problem is enormous. And problems that haven't been published yet, things that people have discovered that are risks, flaws, that will allow you to take over somebody's computer. There's a whole industry of people out there who are trying to find those, and they find them and they put them on the shelf. And then when they want to hack into somebody, they pull them off the shelf and they use them. And that's the first time that anybody on the planet Earth has seen those. Those are called zero-day attacks. So if you see stories that talk about a zero-day attack, that's what that is. There's nothing you can do. You're using off-the-shelf software. You're using what everybody else on the planet is using. You're doing everything right, but there is a typo somewhere. There is a bug in the software, and somebody has figured that out. And you can be hacked, even if you did everything right. So
Okay, we'll take a couple more questions and then we're gonna wrap it up. I know a lot of us are getting ready to get pajamas, so.
You were talking about the banking, oh, I'm sorry, he pointed at me.
I'm sorry, he's taking the con, but
You were talking about doing your banking separate on a separate computer. What about your taxes? I know that some of the hackers got in this year on the tax returns
Sure.
and got the return checks.
The key, I think, is you want to have a machine for the things that are critical, have your social security number on them, have your account numbers on them, maybe even your health accounts on them, and you want to use that machine only to connect to those things that you're going to do and get off. Don't read email, don't surf the web, don't let your kids play games, you want to have as pristine and locked down an environment as possible, and not do other things on the machine that you do those things on. Does that make sense? And I'm going to let you pick, so I won't get.
As you open up an account, it'll say, remember password or not remember the password. Is it good to have your machine remember the password, or should you never do that?
So if this is a machine that you have control of, right, and you don't have to worry about somebody stealing that machine, you're paying attention to it, you're keeping it, right, under control. Those, and I can't say this universally, but if you have one of the operating systems that's most commonly used by people, a Windows operating system, an Apple operating system, some of the Linux versions, then you should be okay letting it store your password. But if you're using some wacky browser that I've never heard of, and there's exceptions to every rule, but in the standard stuff, that's
I'll take one more.
We pay a lot of taxes to our federal government. And we have the OPM get hacked with 20 million or more. What in the heck did they do wrong?
We're almost done, right? I think
That's the last question.
We're out of time.
Okay.
As I said, number one, you can do everything right, and you can still get hacked. And it happens every day. That's number one. Number two, the federal government, like everybody else, they have large, complex systems that have been evolving over a long period of time. They're one of the earliest adopters of computer technology, and so they've got a lot of legacy stuff out there. There's a variety of reasons why it's hard to secure government systems. They have stronger regulatory requirements than most. The FISMA laws are as stringent as the banking laws and various others in this space, so they're under a lot of scrutiny to do this. The biggest challenge for the federal government, and I'm not going to go into the details of how their system specifically got hacked, but the biggest challenge for the federal government, and we just have to recognize this, is they have a procurement process that is so wildly out of sync with the cybersecurity cycle that you cannot buy current technology in the federal government and deploy it in a reasonable time frame. Period, hard stop. When I was at the Department of Homeland Security, you got a 3-year cycle. By the time I could get technology in, it was obsolete. A lot of it was. Or darn close to being obsolete. And so, we complained about that a lot. We did everything that we could. We tried to get the best stuff in as quickly as we possibly could, and they're still doing that today. And they've done an awful lot to try to protect those systems, but it is extremely hard to do given the way the procurement process works.
And I suppose the follow-up question is, what about Hillary's emails?
I'm so glad he said the last question. Last question. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rick. We appreciate it very much. I know there are a lot more questions. I had some myself, but I'm glad.